The wind whispered through the broken slats of the old wooden fence, brushing against the porch like a careful memory. Inside the small house on the edge of town, Joseph Brooks Saturday in his rocking chair, staring out the window with tired, unwavering eyes. 3 ceramic mugs Saturday untouched on the shelf to chipped, one still whole. He only ever used the chipped one. His hands, though wrinkled and tired, still moved with a kind of practiced precision as he whittled a small piece of wood into the shape of a bird. It wasn't for anyone in particular, just something to keep his fingers busy. The radio crackled in the corner, stuck between stations again. Old Jez fought with static, the voice of a trumpet, trying to break through fog. He didn't bother to fix it. He liked it that way. The scent of motor oil and tobacco still clung to the floorboards, even though it had been years since he'd lit a cigarette. His doctor told him to quit, and for some reason, maybe boredom, maybe shame, he listened. He looked to the wall. A faded photograph hung there, black and white, curled at the edges. A younger version of himself in uniform, standing straight, shoulders back, eyes hard like stone. He never told anyone in town who he was, what he had done, what he had seen, not because he was ashamed, but because they never asked. People didn't ask old black men about their pasts in this town. They asked if you needed help mowing the lawn. They asked why your grass grew too long. They asked what church you went to, but never who you used to be. So Joe kept to himself, planted his garden, read his paper, walked to the Veterans Memorial every Sunday, just before the crowds, always alone, always early. Sometimes he'd sit on the bench near the fountain, watch the names etched into the stone, and wonder how many of them had died with the same silence inside. There were ghosts in that town. He saw them in the cracks of the sidewalks, in the faces of the children who stared too long, and in the eyes of the old white man who still looked through him instead of at him. But Joe was not bitter. He was tired, and tired men don't hate, they endure. That morning, as the sun broke through the clouds, casting soft light over his porch, Joe knew something had shifted. The air was different, not heavy, not loud, but alert, like the jungle before an ambush. He had known that feeling before, a long time ago, in a different world, but the instinct never left, not completely. He set the carved bird on the table, took a slow breath, then stood, his knees popped a quiet rebellion, but he didn't grimace. He picked up his old cane, the one with the initials carved in at the top, J. Way, and stepped outside. The street was still, but something in the silence told him it wouldn't stay that way for long. The town had always been slow to change. Streets stayed cracked, stores changed names but not owners, and faces aged without ever really learning. But lately, something had started to fester, like rot beneath the surface, quiet, but spreading. It began with whispers, out-of-towners, new boys hanging around the feed store, laughing too loud, driving too fast. They weren't from here, but they wanted to own it. Cody and Travis, to names that sounded like They belonged in a hunting magazine or a police report. Early 20s, pale and sharp around the eyes. Too much idle time, and just enough hate to make it dangerous. They came to the town like coyotes, sniffing, circling, looking for something weak to chew on. They started with graffiti, back of the gas station, then threats, then beer bottles through windows after midnight. Nobody said much, not the sheriff, not the mayor. Because Cody's uncle owned land, and Travis' daddy sold trucks to half the county. One afternoon, Joe walked to the market, as he did every Wednesday, just after the lunch crowd. He liked it quiet, liked being invisible. But this time, the quiet didn't greet him, it watched him. He felt it as he walked past the diner, eyes, two sets, burning from a pickup truck parked near the curb. The window rolled down, a voice spilled out sharp, cocky, "Hey, old man, you forget your leash." Joe kept walking, didn't even blink, didn't even turn his head. A chuckle followed, then another voice deeper, colder, that he's one of them quiet ones, the ones that think they're better than the rest. Joe's pace never changed, but something tightened in his chest. Not fear, not quite anger, something older. He'd felt it in the jungle, right before the first bullet screamed. He reached the store, bought bread, milk, a single apple. The clerk smiled politely, but didn't meet his eyes. He never did. On his way out, the truck was gone, but a single beer can lay crushed near his path. Fresh, still leaking. Joe paused, looked up at the sky. Clouds were gathering, slow and heavy. He didn't speak, didn't curse, didn't pray. He just walked home, each step slower than the last, each breath deeper, heavier. Because he knew something now. The war might have ended decades ago, but the fight was still here, just wearing a new face. The next few days passed in silence, but not the kind Joe liked. It was tight, cold, like something waiting to strike. He could feel it in his bones, in the way birds stopped chirping when he stepped outside, in how the wind shifted when he opened his gate. On Saturday morning, Joe shaved, buttoned his cleanest shirt, and made his way into town again. Not because he needed anything, but because he refused to be chased from his own routine. He walked slow, his cane tapping rhythm on the sidewalk. Some people nodded, most didn't, same as always. But the truck was back, different spot this time, parked crooked by the market entrance, engine still running. Cody leaned against the hood, shirtless, tattooed, sweating bare. Travis Saturday in the driver's seat, arms crossed, chewing gum like it owed him something. Joe didn't flinch, didn't change direction, didn't slow. He just walked toward the store, right through the middle of them. "You hard of hearing, old man," Cody said, stepping in front of him. "Didn't you get the message last time?" Joe looked at him, really looked. The boy's face was young, but the eyes were rotten. Joe said nothing, just took a step to the side. But Cody didn't move. Instead, he smiled, an ugly, toothpick grin. Then he knocked Joe's cane out of his hand. It clattered on the pavement like a broken bone. People turned. No one moved. Travis laughed from the truck. Look at him, men can't even stand without a stake. Joe didn't bend down, didn't beg. He just looked Cody in the eye, longer than most ever dared. And in that stare, there was no fear, no hate, just silence. The kind of silence that comes after gunfire, the kind that fills graves. Cody shifted, just for a moment. Something cold passed down his spine, though he'd never admit it. You think you're better than me, he snapped. You don't talk, don't look scared. You think you're untouchable. Joe didn't answer. He bent, slowly, and picked up his cane. His joints cracked like old hinges. Then he walked away, back straight, head high. Not a single word. But the quiet he left behind was louder than any punch. The sky darkened earlier than usual, a summer storm rolling in from the west, again slow. Joe Saturday on the back porch, raincoat draped over the rail, watching the clouds gather like soldiers before a siege. He held a photograph in his lap, edges curled, black and white fading to gray, for young men in uniform, smiling, shoulders touching, eyes full of fire. Only one of them was still alive. Joe traced the edge of the photo with a careful thumb. One of them, Malcolm, had been the loud one, always telling jokes, even under fire, killed by a mine outside Da Nang. Another, Leroy, broke down after they cleared a village. Too many bodies, too many children. He took his own life 6 months after coming home. And Reggie, his best friend, his brother in all but blood, had died in Joe's arms. A sniper round. Clean, fast, but it still felt like drowning. The rain began to fall, slow at first, then harder. It drummed on the tin roof like distant gunfire. Joe didn't move, he just stared at the photo. He could still hear Reggie's voice, still smell the jungle, still taste the fear, the sweat, the iron of blood. So much blood, and for what? To come home to a country that still looked at him like he was nothing, to get spat on in his uniform, to be called boy by men who'd never held a rifle. The thunder cracked. Joe flinched, just slightly. His hand instinctively moved to the side of his chair, to where the M16 used to rest. It wasn't there, hadn't been there in decades. But muscle memory was a stubborn thing. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, he wasn't on the porch. He was in the bush, crouched low, heart pounding, Reggie on his left, Malcolm up front. Sweat dripping, breath held, waiting, listening. Then, gunfire, screams, smoke. Joe opened his eyes. He was home again, alone. Rain pouring sideways now, soaking the floorboards. He took a deep breath, held it, released. He wasn't the kind of man to cry. But something inside cracked, not like glass, more like cold wood, splitting along lines already weakened by time. He looked down at his hands. They were shaking. Not from fear, from memory. The boys in that truck, they thought they knew what strength looked like. Thought it came in loud voices and swinging fists. They didn't know what real fear was. They'd never had to carry a man with half a chest across a rice field. They didn't know what silence meant, what it cost. Joe stood, the photo still in his hand. He walked to the old wooden box near his shed, unlocked it, lifted the lid. Inside, his medals, his flag, his discharge papers, his sidearm. Everything he tried to forget. He placed the photo inside, gently closed the lid, and whispered, so softly even the rain couldn't hear, "I ain't done yet." The storm passed by morning, but it left a film over everything, a quiet tension, as if the ground itself remembered. Joe stepped outside just after sunrise. The air was thick with moisture, leaves sagged with the weight of rain. His garden had taken a beating. Tomato vines split, peppers bent like broken soldiers. He worked for hours, slow and steady, hands in the soil, eyes on the dirt, but something felt off. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was the wrong kind of quiet. Birdsong didn't return. Dogs didn't bark. Even the wind had stopped moving. Joe looked to the tree line behind his fence. Nothing there, but he knew better. That night, he didn't sleep. His Saturday by the window, lights off, eyes open. His cane rested by the door, but next to it, a length of chain and a rusted army-issue knife he hadn't touched in years. The moon cast long shadows through the trees, stretching like claws across the yard. Then, a creak, soft, deliberate, back gate. Joe didn't move, didn't breathe. He listened. Footsteps, two sets, crushed leaves, whispers, laughter. He knew those voices, even muffled. They rang with the same empty cruelty he'd heard into many mouths before. Cody, Travis. They were out there, trespassing, circling. But they weren't there to steal. They were there to provoke, to test, to see how far they could push the quiet man. Joe's Saturday in the dark, heart steady, eyes tracking every sound. They kicked the side of the shed, laughed, scratched something into the wood. Then silence again. A door creaked, fence rattled. They were gone. Joe didn't rise, didn't shout, didn't call the police. He just waited a while longer, then stood, opened the door, stepped into the night air. The grass was wet. His boots sank into the mud. He walked the perimeter of his yard, slowly, silently, like a soldier on night watch. He found the scratch on the shed, a crude symbol, hateful and familiar. He ran a thumb over it, then turned back toward the house. But before going in, he whispered, "I've seen your kind before." Then louder, into the dark, "You don't scare me." The wind picked up then, as if something had been waiting for permission. The shadows shrank, the crickets returned. But the war had just begun. The morning after the trespass was bright, but the light didn't reach inside Joe's chest. He moved with purpose, his steps measured, his eyes sharp. The shed door creaked as he opened it. The old hinges groaned like they knew what he was about to do. Inside, dust danced in the beams of sunlight. The air smelled of rust, and something older, readiness. He reached for the green duffel bag tucked behind the stacked firewood. Heavy, untouched in years, but never forgotten. He carried it to the kitchen table, set it down, unzipped it. Inside, everything that once defined him. A knife in its leather sheath, his field journal, a compass, 2 sealed ration bars, expired but intact, and at the bottom, a folded Samoa jacket, still bearing the faded patch, U.S. Army J. Brooks. Joe stared at it, ran his fingers across the letters, then stood, walked to the bathroom, changed, slicked back his graying hair. When he returned, he wore the jacket. It didn't fit quite the same, too loose at the shoulders, too tight at the wrists, but it didn't matter. It wasn't for comfort, it was for memory, for truth, for armor. He opened the windows, listened to the street. Nothing, quiet again, but not peaceful. He moved through his house like a man preparing for siege, checked the locks, reinforced the door frames, adjusted the placement of his walking cane, now within easy reach at every angle. He cut rope, cleaned his knife, oiled the hinges of the back door. The routine calmed him, each step familiar, like drills in the jungle. He didn't want violence, but he would meet it on his terms. That afternoon, he walked to the hardware store, picked up nails, screws, to motion sensor lights. Nobody questioned him. Nobody offered help. On his way home, he passed by the diner. Through the glass, he saw Travis sitting in a booth, laughing, feet kicked up, beer in hand. Their eyes met, just for a second. Travis smirked, mocked a salute, tipped his imaginary hat. Joe didn't blink, didn't stop. But inside, he felt it, that old hum, that electric buzz behind the ribs. The smell of war, not fire, not smoke, but the moment before, when everything goes still, when instinct takes over. He made it home, closed the door, bolted it, then Saturday in the dark for a long time, his jacket still on. He wasn't thinking of how to fight, he was remembering how to win, and how to survive afterward. Saturday, Park Day, the town's weekly ritual. Children ran with sticky hands and grass-stained knees. Mothers talked loud and long near the benches. Old men played checkers beneath the oak tree. Joe came like he always did, early, quiet, with his brown paper bag and thermos of black coffee. He took his seat near the memorial, same bench, same spot. The names on the stone greeted him like old friends. He Saturday there in stillness, watching people pass, watching them not see him, until two shadows broke through the crowd. Cody and Travis, laughing, drunk, maybe, or just dangerous enough to pretend they weren't. Joe saw them coming, didn't move, didn't need to. Cody walked up first, loud as ever. "Hey there, General." He gave a mocking salute, laughed. Travis followed, beer in hand. "Mind if we join your little war memorial tea party?" Joe looked forward, eyes on the stone, hands folded in his lap. He said nothing. Cody stepped closer, too close. His shadow fell over Joe's feet. "You deaf, old man, or just rude?" No answer. So Cody leaned in, poured the rest of his beer over Joe's lap. The cold hit fast. The stench followed. People turned, eyes flicked toward them, then quickly away. Laughter from Travis, then others, a few teenagers nearby. One woman snorted, covered her mouth. Joe Saturday still, sort, silent. Travis walked up, knocked Joe's cane from his hands. It clattered onto the pavement. Again. He smirked. "Guess that war training didn't teach you balance." More laughter. Joe looked down, at the cane, at the beer on his pants. Then up, at the names on the wall. His eyes rested on one, Reginald Reggie Moore. He closed his eyes, breathed in, long, so. When he opened them, the sun had shifted, the shadows had moved, but the fire in his chest stayed the same. He reached down, picked up his cane, stood, one slow motion. Cody took a step back. Not fear, not yet, but discomfort. Something in Joe's eyes, something ancient. Joe turned, walked away, past the crowd, past the laughter. No words, no glance. Only silence. And that silence was louder than any scream. The next day was still. No wind, no voices. Even the birds seemed too ashamed to sing. Joe Saturday at his table. His damp jacket hung over the chair, dried stiff with beer and public shame. He hadn't eaten, didn't feel like it. The silence in his house was thicker now, not peaceful, not meditative, but heavy, suffocating. The kind of silence that follows a defeat. He picked up his cane, walked to the mailbox. So, careful, every step still strong, but not as proud. Inside, a single envelope. No return address, just his name, written in block letters. Joseph Brooks. He paused, turned it over. The seal was clean, but old, handwritten, unfamiliar. He went back inside, Saturday down, and opened it. The letter was short, typed on an old machine, yellowed at the edges. Dear Sergeant Brooks, it's been over 50 years, but I remember your face like it was yesterday. You pulled me out of that ravine. When the rest of our unit scattered, I would have bled out in the mud if it weren't for you. They gave you a medal, but what you gave me was my life. I heard through the VA you're still in that small town. I hope they're treating you better than they treated us back home. I wanted to say thank you for everything. I never forgot. Sincerely, Marcus Allen, per Battalion, Echo Company. Joe stared at the paper for a long time. He didn't move, didn't breathe, just let the words sit there, on the table, on his chest, on his soul. He remembered that mission, remembered the mud, the rain, the bullets, the way Marcus screamed, the way he carried him to miles through the jungle with a bullet in his own shoulder. He hadn't thought of Marcus in decades. Had assumed he died long ago, or forgotten him, like most did. But this letter was proof. He mattered, still. Not to the people in town, not to the kids laughing in the park, but to someone, to a man he saved, to a man who lived. Joe set the letter down gently, folded it, placed it in the top drawer of his desk, right next to Reggie's photo. He sat her day back, let the silence fill the room again. But this time, it didn't feel like defeat. It felt like armor. The next morning, Joe stood at the mirror, shaved, buttoned a clean flannel shirt, tied his boots tighter than usual. He looked himself in the eye. The man staring back wasn't broken, wasn't weak. He was awake. He didn't need revenge. He wasn't 20 anymore, didn't have time for petty wars. But he wouldn't let them own his silence, wouldn't let them walk his streets as if they ruled it. Joe stepped outside. The sun was low, golden, cool wind brushed against his skin like a whisper from the past. He walked to the local hardware store, bought two things, a padlock and a length of chain. The cashier, a younger guy, probably new in town, gave him a look, not fear, not respect, just confusion. Joe didn't explain, didn't need to. He headed to the park, same one from before, where kids played, where he'd been laughed at, and where those boys, had spat at him. He found the old flagpole at the edge of the park, rusty, leaning slightly, but still standing. He stood there, looking up at the empty sky. Then he knelt, tied the chain around the base, tied it, locked it shut. No one could lower the flag now. Next, he unfolded an old, creased cloth from his jacket pocket. It was his own flag. A different one. Not just stars and stripes. This one had a faded insignia, 3rd Battalion Echo Company, Vietnam. He hoisted it slowly, his hands shaking, not from fear, but from memory. As the flag reached the top, he stepped back, saluted. People walked by. Some slowed, some stared, One man stopped, asked, "That yours?" Joe looked at him. "Yes," he said, "every thread." The man nodded and walked away. No laughter, no jokes, just silence. And then he saw them. Those two, Brad and Kyle, across the street, leaning against their car, laughing, pointing. They hadn't learned, hadn't changed. But Joe wasn't surprised. He didn't expect growth from weeds. He watched them, then turned and walked back toward home. But not before they saw the flag. Not before they read the insignia. Not before doubt touched their faces, like a shadow. Let them wonder. Let them Google it. Let them ask themselves what kind of man they tried to humiliate. The war wasn't over. Not yet. But Joe had drawn the first line. Without fists, without shouting. Just a flag and a memory. Joe's phone rang just past noon. It was Mrs. Alvarez from across the street. She sounded nervous. "They're back," she whispered. "I saw them, circling, in that same black truck." Joe closed his eyes, nodded slowly. He thanked her, hung up, and didn't waste a second. He grabbed his jacket, slipped a small pouch into the inner pocket. Not a weapon, but a memory, a reminder, his old military id, and a rusted purple heart. He didn't carry them to boast. He carried them so he wouldn't forget what it cost, what he survived. He stepped out. Sky was cloudless, too bright for what was coming. He didn't go to the park, didn't go to the diner. Instead, he walked toward the abandoned train station on the edge of town. It had long become a ghost shell, graffiti-covered walls, shattered windows, and silence thick like dust. He knew they'd follow, and they did. The black truck pulled up as he reached the station steps, tires crunching gravel like bones, doors slammed, boots hit the ground. Brad was first, smiling like he'd just won a prize fight. Kyle followed, baseball bat resting on his shoulder. "Well, look who's sightseeing," Brad called out, old man trying to find where his past died. Joe turned, didn't flinch, didn't speak. Kyle twirled the bat. "You think hanging some flag makes you untouchable?" Joe stepped forward, slowly, his voice calm, measured. "You don't know the weight of the things you mock." Brad laughed. "You some kind of hero now?" Joe's hand went to his chest, tapped the id in his pocket. "I was once," he said, "not for the medals, not for the flag, but for the man I tried to be when no one was watching." Kyle took a step forward, bat lowered. There was something in his eyes, hesitation. But Brad didn't care, didn't want words. He lunged. Joe moved faster than either of them expected, sidestepped, grabbed Brad's wrist mid-swing. The grip, tight as steel. Years in combat had forged hands like that. Brad gasped, tried to pull back. Joe yanked him forward, turned, and sent him face first into the rusted railing. Blood, a scream. Kyle charged next, vibrate. But Joe didn't wait. He ducked low, grabbed a handful of dirt and glass, and flung it upward. Kyle staggered, blinded, dropped the bat. Joe stepped in, pressed his hand to Kyle's throat, not to choke, but to hold him still. His voice didn't shake, it burned. I fought in jungles where snakes crawled into your boots, where the rain smelled like metal, where you watched boys cry for their mothers as they bled out. He shoved Kyle back against the wall. You think I fear you? Silence, only Kyle's panicked breathing, and Brad moaning on the ground. Joe turned, started walking, didn't look back, didn't need to. He didn't feel proud, didn't feel righteous. He just felt tired. But for the first time in a long time, he also felt alive. News travels fast in a small town, especially when it smells like blood. By evening, whispers had already turned into waves. People talked. They always did. But now they looked differently at Joe. Mrs. Alvarez knocked first, bringing a pike he didn't ask for, her eyes full of questions she didn't dare voice. Then the mailman, a simple nod, slower than usual, as if delivering something invisible between the lines. Joe Saturday on his porch, hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug, not drinking, just holding. His knuckles still ached, old bones, old stories. And still, that strange silence inside him, not peace, not pride, but a heavy pulse. At dusk, Deputy Randall showed up, uniform freshly ironed, but his voice creased with discomfort. "Evening, Mr. Carter," he said. Joe nodded, didn't speak. The deputy shifted, cleared his throat. "We got statements from 2 witnesses. They say you acted in self-defense." Joe raised an eyebrow, waited. Randall continued, "They're not pressing charges. Brad's got a busted nose and a bruised ego. Kyle, just shaken, said something about eyes that don't blink." Joe almost smiled, almost. Deputy scratched his chin. "There's talk, people realizing maybe they don't know you like they thought." Joe looked out to the horizon, sun melting behind rooftops. "Let 'em talk," he said, finally. Randall hesitated, then pulled something from his pocket, a photo, folded at the corners. "You were in 2nd Battalion, right?" he asked quietly. "My dad was there too. Now, 68. Joe glanced at the photo. 2 young black soldiers in mud-covered gear, one with a cigarette, one with a grin, both eyes full of ghosts. "I remember him," Joe whispered. They Saturday in silence. 2 men, 2 generations, connected not by blood, but by the same battlefield dust. Finally, the deputy stood. "Town's watching you now, Joe, but maybe they should have been watching all along." He tipped his hat, left without another word. Joe leaned back, the pie still untouched, the air cooling. He looked down at his hands. So much done with them, So much held, so much lost. And now, they were trembling again, but not from fear. From the weight of being seen. For the first time in years. The next morning, the sky looked bruised, a grayish blue, heavy with something unsaid. Joe walked down to the diner, down the same sidewalk he had walked for 20 years. This time, people moved aside, not in fear, but in something like recognition. He didn't smile back, didn't nod, just kept walking. Inside the diner, it was quiet, too quiet. Clinking dishes paused. Conversations broke like glass. He took his usual seat by the window, ordered coffee from Mary, who no longer called him sweetheart. As he stirred the cream into the dark, bitter liquid, the door chimed, and in walked a ghost. Tall, broad, skin dark like his, but with eyes that hadn't yet learned how to close. The man approached slowly, boots heavy on linoleum, dog tags around his neck. Joe Carter. Joe looked up, squinted. That voice, it carried sand and blood. Depends who's asking, he said, not unkindly. The man sat her down, didn't wait for an invitation, put both hands on the table. My name's Malcolm Young. My father was Private Nathan Young. Joe's breath caught in his throat, like he'd swallowed a bullet. He remembered, a skinny kid, boots too big, heart even bigger, died in his arms. On a hill no one cared to remember. You knew him? Malcolm asked, softly now. Joe nodded. He died, Callan, your name, Malcolm whispered. Joe lowered his gaze, hands trembling again, but this time from a different war. I never knew why, Malcolm continued. Till I saw what you did to those boys, and I thought, that must be the man my father believed in. Joe didn't speak. The coffee had gone cold. The world had gone silent. Malcolm leaned forward. You saved his life once. At the river. He wrote it in his journal. Said a man pulled him out before the mine exploded. Joe looked away, through the window, at the town that once looked through him. I just did what a soldier does, he said. Malcolm smiled, a slow, tired kind of smile, one soldier to another. Thank you. He stood, reached into his jacket, pulled out a folded letter. He wrote this to you. Never got to send it. Joe took it, hands trembling worse now, unfolded the paper as Malcolm walked out. The letter began with a joke, just like Nathan, and ended with, I'd follow you into any hell, Joe, because I've seen you fight for people, even when they don't fight for you. Joe put the letter in his coat pocket, pressed it against his chest, and let out a breath he'd been holding for 50 years. The war had never left him, but now, someone had brought back a piece he thought was long buried. That evening, Joe Saturday on his porch, letter still in his coat, heart still at war. He watched the sun set behind the hills, the same hills that had once swallowed fire and steel. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of silence, not as punishment, but as peace. Birds chirped, wind whispered through dry grass, and yet, the sound that echoed loudest was Nathan's voice in that letter. "I'd follow you into any hell." Joe leaned back, closed his eyes. He remembered the boy, the grin, the stupid jokes, the cracked hands. And he remembered the promise, "I'll cover you, old man." Old man, that's what Nathan called him, even though Joe was barely 24. He chuckled. Suddenly, the sound of tires crunching gravel. Joe's eyes opened. A red pickup truck pulled into the driveway. He stood slowly, body stiff from time. The door opened, and out stepped Luke. Not swaggering this time. No cigarette, no slurs, just something heavy in his eyes. Joe didn't move, didn't speak. Let the wind fill the space between them. Luke approached, head low, hands shaking. "I ain't here to start nothing," he said, voice cracked like old timber. Joe raised a brow, said nothing. Luke looked him in the eye for the first time, and Joe saw it. Veil, confusion, fear. I didn't know," Luke muttered. "I didn't know you fought. Didn't know you were more than what I saw." Joe let out a breath. "You saw what you wanted to see," he said quietly. Luke swallowed, hard, nodded. "I came to say I'm sorry," he added. "I don't know if that means much." Joe held up a hand. "Words are easy, son. Truth's harder." Luke looked away, ashamed, but didn't walk off. Joe studied him, long, so, and then he reached into his coat, pulled out Nathan's letter, held it for a second, then tucked it back in. "You know what saved me in that war?" Joe asked. Luke shook his head. "It wasn't bullets, wasn't training, wasn't God. It was a kid who saw past color and called me brother." Luke looked up, eyes wet. "I ain't him," he whispered. "No," Joe said, "but maybe you could be, if you try hard enough." They stood there, old soldier and young fool, both holding pieces of what might still be fixed. Luke nodded, then, without another word, turned and walked back to his truck. Joe Saturday backed down, closed his eyes again. This time, he smiled, just a little. Because forgiveness didn't come easy, but neither did grace. And somehow, he tasted both. It was Sunday. Church bells rang softly in the distance, though Joe hadn't set foot in one in years. The town was quiet, just the hum of cicadas and the distant bark of a dog. Joe Saturday on his porch as usual, rocking back and forth, a habit born of war nerves and long nights. He ran a finger along the edge of Nathan's letter. The corners had softened now. The ink faded, but the words still burned clear in his heart. Then he heard it, a knock on the gate. 3 slow raps. He turned his head. A young woman stood outside. Late 20s, maybe. Hair tied back, simple blouse and jeans. But her eyes, they held something familiar, something that made his stomach twist. She stepped forward carefully, didn't speak yet, just took a breath, as if holding back a tide. Mr. Joseph Carter. Joe's grip tightened on the armrest. Who's this kid? She smiled, nervous, soft. My name is Lydia Mathers. She reached into her bag, pulled out a photograph, faded, worn at the edges. She handed it to him. Joe looked. It was Nathan, younger, standing with a woman and a baby in his arms. Joe's breath caught. That baby, she said, voice trembling, is me. Joe looked up at her, his face unreadable, eyes glossy, chest rising, falling slow. I found your name in his things, Lydia went on. After my mama passed, there were letters and stories. Joe cleared his throat, but said nothing. I needed to see the man he trusted with his life. She smiled again, eyes wet now. He called you his brother. Joe stood, so the ache in his knees didn't matter now. He looked at her long and hard, then opened the gate. Lydia stepped inside, carefully, as if walking into hallowed ground. They sat her day, side by side, under the shadow of an old oak. For hours, they talked. She asked about the war, about Nathan, about the man her father once saved, and who'd once saved him. Joe told her everything, not just about battles, but about courage and fear, and the bond that outlasted bullets. By sunset, they were both quiet. Tears had dried, hearts lighter. She held his hand gently. Thank you, she whispered, for keeping his memory alive. Joe nodded, his throat too tight to speak. And for the first time in decades, he didn't feel alone. He felt remembered. The next morning came with golden light, warm and soft, like the kind Joe hadn't felt in years. He stood before the mirror, buttoning up an old shirt, the same one he wore at Nathan's funeral. The collar still a bit stiff, the fabric faded, but proud. Today, he was going out, not just to the porch, not just to the grocery store. He was going back to the Veterans Hall. He hadn't set foot there in 20 years, not since they built the new one, downtown, the one with polished floors, and men who didn't look him in the eye. But things felt different now. Lydia had brought more than a photo. She'd brought a reason, a bridge. He took his time walking down the street, came tapping gently on the sidewalk. People watched him pass. Some nodded, some looked away. He didn't care. He walked with his back straight, his chest proud, his skin dark, his scars visible. And he didn't hide them. When he arrived, The man at the front desk looked up, surprised, then confused. "Can I help you, sir?" Joe gave a half smile. "Name's Joseph Carter, veteran, Korea, 51 to 53. I reckon I belong here." The man blinked, then slowly stood, offered a handshake. "Welcome back, Mr. Carter." Inside the hall, the walls were covered with framed photos. Men in uniform, battles from scene in black and white. Joe walked past them, his eyes pausing on each, not searching for fame, just memory. Then, in the far corner, he found it, an old display case. Behind the glass, a medal, a folded flag, and a yellowed photo. Kim and Nathan. Young, smiling, hands on each other's shoulders. Joe pressed a hand to the glass, not for the photo, but for the man beside him in it. "I'm still here, brother," he whispered. "You didn't die for nothing." That night, he returned home. The stars were out, bright and clean, the kind you only see after rain. He Saturday on the porch again, same chair, same breeze, but something was different. Inside, Lydia was asleep. She was staying for a few days, wanted to hear more, said she was writing it all down. Joe smiled, sipped his tea. The world had tried to forget him, but it hadn't. Two men had tried to tear him down, but they didn't win. Because a soldier never stops fighting, even when the war is over. He looked up at the sky and whispered one last word, for Nathan, for the men they lost, for the young fools who didn't know better. Still standing. And somewhere in the wind, he could almost hear a salute, a voice on the breeze, and the rustle of a flag that never stopped waving.